Hello and welcome to the Accents podcast on WUKY. My name is Katerina Stoykova. I'm the creator and the host, and this episode has been brought to you by Accents Publishing, an independent press for brilliant voices. Today's brilliant guest is poet Marianne Worthington. Hi, Marianne. Welcome to Accents.
Hi, Katerina. Thanks for having me.
Last time we spoke on Accents, we had a wonderful conversation about your then new book, The Girl Singer. And
Yes.
today we're talking about another one.
Right. Yes, my second collection, and it's called Water, Witness, Word, and it's published by Bell Point Press in Arkansas. And it comes out June 23rd.
Water, witness, word. Three words that start with W. I
Yes.
almost expected the first part to be titled Water, the second Witness, and the third Word.
I kind of had that structure in mind while I was putting the manuscript together. So even though they're not titled that, that was my thinking behind how to organize the collection. And that phrase comes from my teacher, my first poetry teacher in college, Jeff Daniel Marion, who was a wonderful poet in East Tennessee and was my professor and then was my friend for almost 40 years. And so that line appears in one of his poems in his last book, and it's always just stuck with me. And so I wanted to borrow it as a way to organize my own thoughts, but also as a way to honor Danny, who gave me so much while he was living.
You honor quite a few people in this book.
I do. Yes, I do. And I don't think that that was intentional. It just sort of worked out that way, but I like that. I like writing praise poems or um, poems that refer to people who've had an influence on you. And some of the people I know personally and some of the people I don't know personally.
Well, whenever I think of you, I think of a generous and kind person, and this shows in your poems as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
There is a lot of sadness in this book, also anger and nostalgia.
Yes, yes. Well, first of all, the poems were written, almost all of them were written starting during the pandemic. So, you know how mad we all were during the pandemic. Everybody was mad during the pandemic. Everybody's still mad, I think, just to a certain extent. So that was kind of the mindset. I heard so many of my friends say, "Oh, I just can't write during the pandemic. I just, I can't read, I can't write, I can't concentrate." But I found this energy I didn't know that I had during the pandemic, and also I just made a pact with myself to try to write as much as I could and study as much as I could and read as much as I could during the pandemic. And of course, I mean, I was still working then, so again, it took 5 years for the poems to all come together. But yeah, there is sadness, but I think there's joy too, but yeah, there is some sadness. Um, I'm sad about, people that I've lost in my life. I'm sad about the state of politics. I'm sad about climate catastrophe. And I think all those ideas are reflected in the poems somewhere, somehow.
Well, also there is love and perspective. We do understand our families better as we grow older, yes?
Yes, we do. And especially I found especially when you don't know all of the answers and everyone is gone and there's no one left for you to talk to about what happened. So, really that's great fodder for a poet or a fiction writer because if you don't know the exact detail, you can give yourself poetic license to invent some of those details. But yeah, you're right. There is a knowing of family that comes, I think, with age and after everyone has gone, you know. That's another thing I'm mad about, Katerina. I'm kind of mad that I'm the oldest one left, that now I'm the matriarch, and all my other relatives are gone except for my sister, immediate relatives, you know. I have some cousins left, but several of my cousins have died. All of my older relatives, of course, are gone. And so, yeah, there's sadness in that.
But also seems like a privileged position in a way to be at the top of the family tree.
Well, I guess you could look at it that way. Maybe I need to do that, Katerina, is look at it that way instead of thinking about it as, something that's sad.
I think it's the place of honor.
Maybe. Yeah, maybe. But my family is so small. Um, it's just me and my sister, and I have a daughter. And I have a husband, but my husband's an only child. And so, and my sister doesn't have any children. So my daughter grew up without any cousins, no cousins, which was so weird to me because I always had cousins. So we're small, but we're still mighty.
Since we're talking about family, talk about the delicate art of writing about one's family.
I always have had a hard time with that because I think I still put a little bit too much stock in being afraid of what people are going to think. A lot of family members who might read my poems might take them all literally word for word. And then, I mean, this happened with my first book, like they would say, well, it didn't really happen that way. Well, yes, I know that, but, um, I'm a poet, so I'm taking those liberties as I want to. There's also I think there's a great responsibility in writing about your family because you have to find a way to connect it to everyone else whose family is different from yours. So that's a challenge. Um, and I do write a lot about my family, but I love reading poems by other poets who are writing about their families.
You write about your family in a way that I was able to connect to, and um, I want to write several after poems now, after Marianne Worthington. You know, it's poems about sickness, poems about caregiving of sick loved ones, the decisions to let go, the guilty relief when
Yes,
they have gone.
yes.
I'm able to connect with that. And my family is different, in a different place. So I think that everybody with a family will be able to connect with the poems. And they're so well written. Pretty much every one of them broke my heart in a different way. And I mean that in the best sense of the word. And maybe now is the time that I should say that I love this book.
Thank you. Thank you.
Why don't we hear several poems now?
Okay. This is called It's Summer, and I'm worried about the election. I'm not sure what to do about the deer who have suddenly emerged around us. Next door, we watch the spotted baby trapped by the neighbor's fence, the woods open to her just beyond her frenzied pacing. How we learn so young to be afraid, to run for the thicket, to nuzzle into our herd of mothers and aunts. I think about how we are so much worse than wild animals, our moneyed egos thrust into each other's chests, our fear mongering becoming a habit, like smoking. It will get us eventually, but we jones for that nicotine, baby. Meanwhile, the deer are still in the woods that surround us, timid behind the branches, running toward the creek if we startle them when coming outside. How they leap and jump, how their hoofbeats make a rhythm we could dance to. How the fleeting sight of them helps plug the holes our mothers left behind when they died. How their absences darken like the woods, hushed after the deer have gone. And let's see. Low Ground of Sorrow. Let's do Low Ground of Sorrow. This is a poem about my father. And before it appeared in this book, it was in an anthology that was called Braving the Body. And I was really honored to be in that anthology with some other poets that I deeply admire. So this is Low Ground of Sorrow. I'm not embarrassed when I see grown men cry because my father cried. He cried big and out loud, his chin bobbing, his face melting into that low ground of sorrow he liked to sing about in his high, lonesome voice. Sometimes he tried to explain his crying mid-sob. His voice would catch and latch as water ran from his nose in honest streams. Sobbing was a type of testimony, evidence of faith in the grammar of sadness. When his mother died, he cried and gulped for air. He sat up late in his chair and smoked Winston after Winston until finally my mother called the doctor, who sent over pink liquid in a bottle, which he refused, the same way he pushed back food and sleep for days. His tears mapped their crossing together for the mother who saved him after he suffered a stroke at age 16 at school, carried home by neighbors. He cried for his mother who shielded him from his father, who wanted him to get back up, get back to work on the farm. He wept while telling me how mean he treated his mother while relearning how to walk, how to speak. He was sorry he had taken his injuries out on her, even as he tried to make restitution the rest of his days, caring for her in her very old age, tipping the paper boy to lay her newspaper behind the dry storm door, ferrying her to market, to doctors, to the polls so she could vote, checking on her daily until he found her one Saturday morning, still in bed, her teeth in the bedside glass, and he cried finally without apology, broken down, out in the open, a torrent of tears without ceasing, while the anniversary clock from his boyhood room ticked its eulogy, its pendulum knobs twirling out a prayer.
Could you read the one about the two sets of sisters?
Little child, won't you dance with me? We are four girls, two sets of sisters, and we are wearing out our shared copy of the Meet the Beatles album on the stereo. The console stereo hulks in the corner of the foyer. We can close off the kitchen door where our parents are laughing and playing dominoes and have our own private dance party. We all know how to do the twist. Even our fathers can do the twist, and they do, stopping to dance with us and make faces on their way to and from the bar downstairs where the liquor is locked away in a cabinet. The foyer floor is slate and cool on our bare feet. We can rest during the slow songs, This Boy and Till There Was You. We study the album cover, all black except for the half moon faces of the band that's enchanted all the girls and boys our age. John's head is the biggest, then George, then Paul. Ringo lurks below in the right corner like an afterthought. In a little while, not so far from this radiant moment of laughing and dancing, one of us will figure out how to unlock the liquor cabinet and learn to function as an alcoholic. Two of us will have abortions before Roe v. Wade. One of us will be diagnosed with a chronic illness that marks us all with fatigue and worry. Our mothers will succumb to this very illness too. They will be in the hospital at the same time. They will die just days apart. One of us will have lung cancer that metastasizes to the liver and brain. One of us will have open heart surgery. Three of us will be divorced. One of us will not have children. One of us will marry a Beatles scholar. And all of us will die long before the others are ready to let go.
So stunning, all of these poems.
Thank you.
Talk about storytelling in poetry.
I think storytelling is sort of the heart of a poem. And not that it has to tell a particular story or, have a middle, a beginning, and an end like a traditional story, but there has to be usually, it helps if there's a narrative element that readers can latch onto. There's a beautiful Ellen Bryant Voigt poem that I love. It's about her father planting trees on the place where she lived. And then the poet goes back to that place and sees all the trees that the father has planted and is just overwhelmed with all of that greenery and all of that shade. And she tells these little stories about her father in that poem. So the poem is not really about something that happened to her father. It's really about the poet going back and looking at, what she grew up with. But there's these little elements of narrative in there, which I think help the reader to hang on. There's a theory that says all communication is really storytelling. I'm not sure that I agree with that 100%, but I'm pretty close. All communication is storytelling, and that the world is nothing but a set of stories from which we must choose. And we choose those stories and we hold on to them because they help us know how to behave and how to interact with other people and, their moral lessons. So I don't know if that's what you were wanting when you asked the question, but that's kind of my take on the importance of storytelling in poetry.
What I was asking for is your thoughts, and you gave them to me. I will quote back to you Jane Gentry, who believed in writing um, stories in her poems, and she would agree with a lot of what you said. Uh,
Yes.
she said, I can't remember exactly how she said it, but in a conversation on accents, she said that stories, the need for stories, is one of the most basic ancient needs that we've had as humans. And she said that it is a need before as basic as food and shelter.
Yes, yes. And do you remember when Jane was poet laureate of Kentucky? One of her platforms was to try to visit every county library in the state. And I don't know if she accomplished getting to all 120 county libraries, but I remember that she came to a neighboring county of mine and I went to see her and she said that very thing. And she talked about Kentucky writers who were poets and storytellers. She talked about Joe Servant. She talked about Morris Manning. She talked about George Ella Lyon and other poets, Kentucky poets. So it was a great thing that was a great platform, I thought, to visit all the county libraries and to talk about storytelling.
What a kind, generous, lovely person.
She
We,
really was. Yes,
we lost her too soon.
we surely did. Yes.
And how do you choose which memory to write about?
Sometimes it's not a choice. It just bothers me until I get it down. And sometimes it is a choice. Um, I don't know. I tend to write not because I have this burning need to get something down on paper that happened to me. I tend to write through prompts and reading which I might not be thinking about a particular thing in my life, but the prompt or whatever I'm reading might lead me to that. So I rely on that a lot. I rely on prompts a lot. Like right now, I'm in Foolishly, the Lexington Poetry Month group where you're supposed to post a poem every day in the month of June. I have not, let's see, it's June 7th. I think I've published 4 or 5 poems, and it's been really hard to try to come up with those, on a daily basis because I'm a slow writer. But I realized that I can't often just sit down and do it. I have to have some sort of impetus. Like I have to read something or I need to look at a prompt or something like that before I can write.
Do prompts explain the appearance of forms in this book?
No, not necessarily. I just really love trying to write in form, and especially if it's a limiting form like a sonnet where you only have 14 lines and you're supposed to follow certain rhyme schemes and meter and rhythm rules. I don't always follow those, but if you say, okay, I got to do this in 14 lines, you have to work really hard to make all those words count. Um, so I like that, I also like the repetition that occurs in poems sometimes, like a pantoum or a villanelle or some kind of refrain that has repetition. I like that. And I think that that comes from growing up listening to the radio and growing up singing hymns in church where it was verse, chorus, verse, chorus, verse, chorus, which reminds me a lot of how poems work. So you'd sing a different verse, but then the chorus would always be the same word. So that was a form of repetition. Um, and I like that. So, but yeah, I just wanted to try to expand my skill set, Katerina, and work on different types of poems that I hadn't ever tried to write before. Like a sestina. I'd never written a sestina. I had started one and it took me almost 10 years to finish it. It was just really hard for me to do that. But now I think I'm ready to write another one. I think I can do another one.
I've never written a sestina. I've been intimidated. I think it's just so difficult.
It is difficult and it is intimidating. But you know what else I found? I found a sort of a variation on the sestina. It's called the arpeggio, and it was concocted by the poet A. Van Jordan. And what he does is use 5 words instead of 6 words at the end. He repeats 5 words and he doesn't use that wacky um, placement of the words that a traditional sestina. He just takes it one at a time and, starts on the second word in the second verse, the third word in the third verse, the fourth word in the fourth verse, etc. And then the ending is a repetition of all 5 of the words, and he calls them arpeggios. And they're a little bit less intimidating. You only have to write one, you have to write one less verse, and you don't have as many balls in the air to juggle. So I'm playing around with that too, and playing around with maybe doing that with 4 words. I haven't come up with a way to describe it yet or title it, but I'm kind of playing around with that too. Because I'm trying to write some poems about a painter, and a lot of her titles for her paintings are 4 words. So I'm playing with those 4 word titles as a way to structure a poem. I don't know if it's going to work yet, but I'm working on it.
Tell us about your relationship with music.
When I was 5 years old, my grandmother had a piano and she had it sent off and had it completely restored and refurnished. It was an upright and it became my piano. She gave it to me. My parents, and we lived in a really small house, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. My parents put that piano in our bedroom. My sister and I shared a room, and we put that piano in our bedroom. And I started taking music lessons when I was about 6. And I learned how to read music then. And then I eventually began to play for choirs. I accompanied a lot of choirs. I accompanied a lot of soloists. All through high school, I played the piano. Then, when I finally got to college, and I was a late bloomer, I didn't go to college till I was almost 30. But when I got to college, I studied organ, and I began to play the organ in churches. And so I was a church musician from the time I was about 15 until about 10 years ago. So that's my music background. My formal music background. I was surrounded by music, but also I loved popular music. I loved country music. I loved rock and roll. I loved the blues. I loved R&B. I loved music, and we never could afford to buy many record albums, but I saved my babysitting money, and about the only thing I ever bought were records, you know, when you could go to the department store and get a record. So I've always had a really strong relationship with an appreciation for music. I don't know if this is true, Katerina, but I think I probably learned to read by following my mother's finger as she pointed to the words in the hymn book when we would sing on Sunday mornings. Because we would share a hymn book, and she would hold it down low for me to see, and she would point to the words as we were, singing. And I don't know, but I know that I could read before I started school. And I think that was probably one of the ways that I learned how to read, was reading the hymn book.
That sounds totally plausible to me.
Yeah. And I still use the hymn book as a resource. I use the metrical index all the time. I look at first lines and titles all the time. I think about the way hymns are constructed. So I still use the hymn book as a real important it's a real important source for me. I don't This is going to sound, well, I don't know how it's going to sound. I don't necessarily agree with the theology anymore that's couched in hymns. In fact, there's a line in Justin Weimer's new book of poems where he says something about hymns are setting dogma to music. And in a way, that's true, but I never thought of it that way. It helped me think about that. But the structure of hymns, and the melodic structure of hymns, and the chord progressions, and the verses, and the way the rhymes are constructed, all that's really still really fascinating for me.
Would you read us a poem from the last section of the book, a music-related poem?
Sure. So this poem is about two birds that we don't hear much anymore, and about things slipping away. And in the poem I read earlier, Low Ground of Sorrow, I talked about my father's singing voice, and I surprised myself at how many times his singing shows up in my poems. In this collection, particularly, I wasn't aware that I was doing that, but this is another poem with my father. It's called The Dwindling. Before the field became a building, before I lost my sense of wonder, the lanky field grass whistled to me. My father heard the grasslands trilling and imitated the call I heard that summer. It's a bird, a quail that calls its own name. Bob White, Bob White, Bob White. The woods we learned by following boys who knew the shortcuts from backyards yawning open into awnings of shade and a coolness that splashed our faces. Leaf litter cackled under our feet. Under the trees we sleuthed until we surfaced, surprised by how we arrived behind the rec center or at the store at the foot of the ridge. After dark, we heard the nightjar shrilling the double letters of its name. Whippoorwill, whippoorwill, whippoorwill. My father might sing out a remembrance in his high voice, calling back through the dark. She's mine, and the thought of her grows sweeter when it's time for the whippoorwill to sing. Sometimes I dream he sings yet, he knew so many songs. I want to dream the calls of the quail and the nightjar, for only in sleep can I hear their music, absent, like my father's singing voice, spent as the field and the woods.
This is so lovely.
Thank you.
And there is a poem that I'm going to ask you about. I'm curious how you read out loud How to Navigate a Long Illness, a Short Story.
I don't think I can ever read that one out loud, Katerina. And I knew that when I was writing it. And this actually came from a class I was taking with Katie Regal, who is a poet and teacher. And she um, challenged us to write a poem where we mark out things, but we leave them visible for the reader. In other words, things are marked out, but there's just a slash through them so you can still see them. And so I use that technique to try to get at the truth of what I felt, which I knew I couldn't say out loud, and the reality of what happened. So the poem is about my mother had a long illness with lupus, and she had a very extreme case. It paralyzed her from the waist down, and she lived for 4.5 years like that. And her care was way beyond what we could give, and she agreed to live in a nursing facility. Um, where she was kind of the star of the show. You know, she wasn't diminished mentally, so she was very sharp. She had very sharp faculties and was, able to keep up with herself and advocate for others who weren't able to do that. But there was so much that went on behind the scenes. Like there was a doctor who just gave up on her and said, "Well, I guess you just need to trust Jesus." you know, because he's the great healer. And I got so mad. I got so mad when he said that. I just didn't think I was going to be able to get out of that room without, hurting that doctor. So that was the reasoning behind it. But you know what, Katerina? It's a poem for the page, for the reader, and I don't think it would be something that I could ever read out loud.
I think it's a fantastic poem. So, our listeners will have to find it and read it themselves.
Yes.
What about Tennessee? Tennessee takes center stage in this book, and it's almost a character.
Yes. Well, Tennessee, it kind of is a character for me. I grew up in Knoxville in East Tennessee, and I just live an hour away in southeastern Kentucky. And even though I've lived in Kentucky since 1990, so 36 years, um, I I call Kentucky home. I know that I will never be considered a native Kentuckian or a local, no matter how long I live in Kentucky. You have to be born and raised here to be a true Kentuckian, I've learned. But Tennessee is just ingrained in me, and the experiences that I had growing up in Tennessee. Tennessee's not a great place to live now, especially politically, but it sure does hold memories for me. So, yeah, Tennessee was really important to me and still is.
So, do you feel sometimes othered that you're not from Kentucky?
No, I don't. But I know also that I can't, I don't have the same credibility as people who were born and raised here. You know, not growing up in Kentucky is different. You know, when you come here as an adult, you don't have that advantage of your growing up years being in southern Kentucky, southeastern Kentucky. Now my daughter did. I mean, we moved when we moved to Kentucky, she was 2, so really she doesn't have any memory of Indiana where we were before. And so she grew up in southeastern Kentucky, and now she lives in East Tennessee. So it's opposite for
Go
her.
figure. So when you say credibility, what do you mean?
I mean, just having the hometown credibility, the homegirl credibility of being from Kentucky, you know? Like there were a lot of things that kids did in Kentucky that we didn't do in Tennessee and vice versa, you know? So, and there were foods that are eaten in even an hour apart, foods that my family never ate that I didn't know about until I got to Kentucky, you know, or started reading Kentucky literature. I mean, I was reading literature from Kentucky, Appalachian literature from Kentucky long before I moved here, but you know, I didn't know what soup beans were. We called them pinto beans. We ate them a lot. I come from a working class family, you know. We had to be careful with our money, but we ate beans a lot. But we called them pinto beans, not soup beans. So for a long time, I didn't know what soup beans were, you know. I didn't understand that they were just pinto beans, but they're just called by a different name, you know. Bulldog gravy, for instance, that's a Kentucky thing, mostly from mining camps. And the way I understand it is it's gravy that's made from the leavings of bacon or sausage, but you used canned milk um, to make bulldog gravy. We never did that in Tennessee. I never heard of chocolate gravy. You know, chocolate gravy and biscuits is a thing in Southern Kentucky, but or Eastern Kentucky, but we never had that, you know. So that kind of credibility, you know.
I understand. And my comment on all this is that I have found being an outsider sometimes carries an advantage because you bring in things that are different and new to the new place, and everybody gets enriched in the process.
Exactly. Yes. And I think I agree with you. I think that is an advantage. Yes. To have that outsider insider perspective, I think is very helpful to a writer.
Your book, I haven't seen it yet physically, but the cover image is gorgeous.
Isn't it?
Yeah, it's a
Yes.
John Lucky, isn't it?
Yes, it's Johnny Lackey and about maybe 2 years ago, he put that print. It's a lino cut. You know, he's cut it and printed it and then hand painted the print. And so he put those on his website for sale. And I bought one of the prints that he had hand painted and framed it and hung it up and looked at it for 2 years thinking, someday I really want this to be, I really want to incorporate this somehow into a project. And so it just worked out. I asked Johnny and he said yes. And so I'm so thrilled because I think Johnny is a really important part of Kentucky arts and letters. And I wanted to showcase his work. Um, and so I'm so very happy to have his cover. And there's a heron on the cover that's pretty prominent in the on the left-hand side of the page. And the heron was sort of the symbolic animal that my poetry teacher Danny Marion adopted as a poet, and he wrote a lot about. He lived on the French Broad, no, he lived on the Holston River in East Tennessee. He lived right on the river. I mean, he had a house that overlooked the river, and he would sit on his porch and watch the herons fish. Um, and so he kind of adopted that as sort of a motivating symbol. And so I was so thrilled to have that heron on the book. But yeah, Johnny's amazing, and I'm so lucky to have that for a cover. So lucky.
I have one last question. That
Okay.
is a question that I ask all my guests who teach creative writing, and that is, what is the most important thing you teach your students? If there is one thing that you want them to remember from your class or workshop, what is it?
I think it would be that poetry is one of the most freeing forms of art because you can do what you want. And yes, sometimes there are rules about, writing sonnets a particular way, but you know what? If you learn the rules, then you can break the rules. So that's kind of my motto. Learn the rules of poetry, and then you can break the rules. And people who also know the rules, when they read your poem, they'll realize that you're breaking the rules, that you're disrupting patterns, and that brings something fresh and wonderful to poetry, I think.
I have found that it is pretty obvious when somebody doesn't know the rules.
Yes, yes, exactly.
I love your book. I wish for it to reach very wide audience beyond your wildest dreams and certainly to have the chance to touch the hearts of the people who need to read it.
Thank you, Katerina. I hope that happens too. And I thank you for inviting me to be on your podcast today.